What does this have to do with the channel? Well, with all of that in place, we sure weren't going anywhere for a while. But a while later, on November the 9th, with the wall of steel recently removed between Metro Melbourne and regional Victoria, we made our first trip outside Metro Melbourne, going up Mount Donabuang and visiting Stevenson's Falls. November the 21st and 22nd we went out again, but we still didn't feel like filming much. But the big goal in sight was to get out properly. Queensland still had a border closure to Victoria, and the announcement that it would open was being eagerly awaited. We had friends and family to stay with up there, and since both of us now worked fully remote jobs, it would be no problem to do them from up there. The announcement came in late November, and pretty much while the Premier was on TV announcing it, I rang the Queensland COVID Contact Centre and asked what I'd have to do in terms of permits. Because at that point, even though New South Wales residents were allowed into Queensland, they still had to apply for a permit and get approval before they were allowed to cross the border. Apparently I'd just broken the news to her that this was happening, so it was suggested that I perhaps call back in a couple of days. The following day, a media announcement was made that the border checkpoints and permit system were just being scrapped entirely. So, Revision 2.0, a trip to Queensland, video 1 of ? We drove up to Parkes, then Moree to be in place on the 30th of November, ready to cross the border on the 1st. We could have stayed in Boggabilla and been an hour closer to the border, but we decided that Moree was a much nicer place to stay. The video title certainly reflects the haphazard nature of the planning. It was pretty much to come up to Queensland, do some stuff, then go back sometime after New Year's. It was the first video made for several months, post the incident, as it were. The border crossing went without a hitch, with no checkpoint in sight, although feeling slightly uncertain as many signs about checkpoints and required permits had not yet been removed. And we stopped for breakfast in Gundawindi. Had a chat with one of the locals who said that a few were even more determined than us, staying in Boggabilla, waiting, crossing the border just after midnight. Apparently there was a line of vehicles that went around the block, then down the road outside the local motel. The very triumphant nature of this video might make you think that we thought COVID was over. While I can't deny that after what we went through, it sure felt like that, and after Victoria had officially achieved elimination, you would be justified in thinking it would at least be a bit quieter from that point. It took only a few weeks of, you're a Victorian, to turn into, you didn't come up via the Northern Beaches, did you? With New South Wales suffering an outbreak, followed by a second outbreak elsewhere in Sydney not immediately linked to it. 3 new cases found in Melbourne, Sydney's Northern Beaches in lockdown over New Year's. Then in January, a hotel quarantine cleaner in Brisbane caught the UK strain, leading to a 3-day lockdown for all of Greater Brisbane. Victoria then once again entered lockdown for 5 days after suffering a quarantine breach of their own. Then Western Australia had an outbreak from quarantine and a lockdown. Then New Zealand of all places. So it really wasn't all that quiet after that. Lastly, as I'm recording this, South Australia's hotel quarantine program has just given somebody COVID, and that person's just travelled over to Melbourne and sparked another outbreak over here, which is currently up to 15 people. Yeah, as of today, we're now going into a 7-day long lockdown, so yeah. Well, 1 week became 2, lockdown ended after 2, but we were left with a 10-kilometre, then a 25-kilometre restriction on travel. The other states didn't open again to us till pretty recently, until New Zealand actually beat them to the punch. And now New South Wales has had an outbreak with about 12 cases yesterday and has possibly sent one over to Wellington, New Zealand. So, certainly interesting, certainly not quiet, and if I don't get this video out already, I'm going to have to record several more of these. So, I didn't think there was much more to this story, but there is. Months ago we booked a trip to New Zealand for a work event XSS was going to that I decided to tag along, and we'd tack on a bit on the start and a bit on the end. I could work from a home in another country, and then we go and see some friends in Auckland and Wellington on either end of the trip. Well, the thing is, we got caught up in the New South Wales COVID outbreak. Now, you might be saying, it looks a lot like New Zealand out there. You know, you got BNZ just over the road. When we thought the trip was as good as dead and buried and were about to go and start seeking refunds from it because Melbourne had just been in lockdown, New Zealand quite understandably closed the border to us, we weren't expecting that New Zealand would reopen the border to Victoria before any other state of Australia did. That was a little bit unexpected, but unfortunately it was a massive inconvenience that the trip was now going ahead at the last minute. And since we were able to go, it got a lot harder to cancel. Thing was, the work event ended up in tatters because New South Wales had the following outbreak and New Zealand closed to New South Wales. And we ended up flying over, only to be met by the news when we arrived in Auckland that due to the outbreak in New South Wales, New Zealand was closing the border to all of Australia as of midnight tonight. Well, we already got in, bit like Indiana Jones sliding under the closing door. Thought we'd nailed the timing. Following morning, doing the daily checking of Melbourne exposure sites to make sure we hadn't been anywhere that was listed as an exposure site. Terminal 2, Melbourne Airport. So, yeah. Flight attendant got COVID in Sydney. Wasn't notified of their positive test in time to stop them from already having flown to Brisbane and then down to Melbourne, then decided to duck from the domestic terminal into the international terminal to grab a coffee. So we've now been in an exposure site. Rang the Ministry of Health immediately. They told us we've received no further guidance at this point, so follow the Victorian rules. And we found the one place in Auckland that's open to get a test on a Sunday. So we got tested, got confirmation of our negative results back, rang Ministry of Health. And they say, yeah, we've received updated guidance on the situation. We've now designated it Casual Plus, which means it's a bit riskier than a casual contact, which doesn't even require getting tested at all. We'll let you out if you get tested 5 days after exposure and isolate until you receive that negative test result. The previous advice you received was incorrect. We were actually meant to have been flying out today. We had to extend the Airbnb by 1 day already for this. And the host is a little bit pissed off at us for this, and well, yeah, now we've got to drop it on them that we'll be here for another few. The New Zealand Ministry of Health has directed us to stay here for 5 days. I'm not going to take the words of an Airbnb host over the New Zealand government. Sorry. Fortunately, we know a friend of ours in Auckland who can drop us off some supplies at our door. That's permitted, providing we don't have any contact with them. And, well, also, in a stroke of incredibly bad timing, the charger for my MacBook's dead. So, yeah.
We're back in business.
There's no bloody bottle opener in here. There we go.
We'll be with you as soon as they are available.
AST motherboard up and running.
So we both got tested on day 5, and we have a negative result returned. I don't have mine back yet. So Ministry of Health has confirmed that XSS is able to leave the apartment because they tested negative. I still don't have mine yet. Rang the doctor twice. They're just like, yeah, your result's just not among one of them, but you'd probably have received a phone call if you tested positive. Probably? Oh, yeah, I don't know, it's funny, they don't normally come up like this. Yeah, what's it doing? Oh, I can't tell you.
Ah, yeah. So weirdly enough, XSS got theirs straight from the Ministry of Health, whereas I had to wait until this afternoon for the doctor to get the result and text it to me.
Yeah, I think that's going to need a bit of an update.